Paul, in the wake of the Bondi Beach massacre, Anthony Albanese is trying to project calm and hope. He's asking Australians to light candles in their windows. What do you make of his response so far?
I understand the Prime Minister calling for calm, calling for unity, calling for hope, and I think all that's important and it's necessary. However, what we need to do is we need to address honestly and confront what this really means. This is a singular and collective Australian failure. We have failed the Australian Jewish community. We have failed the principles of multiculturalism, human respect, decency, faith in religious belief. All these things have been failed in terms of the Bondi massacre. We've got to address this. We've got to be clear-eyed and honest about it. And I think one of the problems the Prime Minister faces is his lack of credibility on this issue. Words won't do any more. The problem with the Albanese government for the past 2 years is that it has singularly failed to address this issue in terms of its seriousness. It's treated anti-Semitism as a political issue to be managed, as an electoral test to be balanced in terms of various electoral factors. That's not good enough. And the legacy of that is this country is left with a very bitter and enduring harvest.
In February this year, Mike Burgess, the Director-General of ASIO, said in his annual threat assessment that anti-Semitism was the number one threat that was on ASIO's radar. It was crystal clear to the government, and yet after that, the government recognised Palestinian statehood and criticised Israel on numerous occasions.
It's one thing for the head of ASIO to deliver that warning, and that warning in retrospect looks a particularly prescient warning. However, there's a difference between ASIO advice on the one hand and government action on the other. The problem we face is that there's been inadequate leadership on this issue, and I'm talking now not just about the politicians. I'm talking now across the board. I'm talking about the leaders of institutions in this country, whether we're talking now about the corporate sector, the university sector, the cultural sector. What we've seen is we've seen Jewish students and staff, we've seen Jewish artists, we've seen all sorts of people from the Jewish community suffer. They've been the subject of harassment, they've been the subject of censorship. We've seen violent attacks on Jewish daycare centres, on synagogues, and the response of the authorities, the response of the police, has not been sufficiently adequate. The response of the politicians, state and federal, has not been sufficiently adequate, although those responses have varied quite a lot. And there's been no sense of wider inspiration and a message of the need for the country to be resolute and address anti-Semitism. No sense of that coming from the Prime Minister himself. And that is really a major problem.
How do governments balance their goal for free speech and what we've heard politicians say in the wake of, say, marches across the Sydney Harbour Bridge or demonstrations at the Opera House or somebody riding a horse down Bondi Beach flying a flag, is that it's okay for people to express their concerns, that it's natural to be distressed by the conflict in the Middle East, and that these are, good people, good men and women expressing their concerns. But there is a small radical element, who can't be conflated with the ordinary mums and dads who just care a lot. What's your view about that and how the government should have actually handled that?
Well, I think there are 2 points to make here. The first point is that one of the iron laws of human history is that if you allow the rhetoric of anti-Semitism to continue on and you don't address it, it ends in murder and violence. Now, we know that. That is the story of centuries. And what we've seen in this country in recent years, the last couple of years, we've seen a prejudiced and complacent Australia pretending that iron law of history about anti-Semitism didn't apply anymore. So that was a mistake. The related mistake was to think that the prevailing norms should just continue. That's not the case. If you've got a fundamental problem like anti-Semitism, it's got to be addressed, and that means it's got to be addressed with new laws, new approaches and new norms. The idea that the status quo can simply continue has just been absurd, and that's what we've learnt from this massacre. This massacre tells us the status quo for the last 2 years was a failure, and it's got to go now. Josh Frydenberg is right when he said everything has got to be on the table. Everything has now got to be considered, whether we're now talking not just about gun laws, whether we're talking now about racial hatred laws, whether we're talking now about the interaction of the police with the community, whether we're talking now about the role of ASIO, and in particular the need for a coordinated, resolute response coming from government. All these things have got to be on the table. They've all got to be addressed. The status quo for the last 2 years has failed. This must be obvious to everybody now.
The political consideration that I think has weighed on Anthony Albanese, certainly in the lead up to the May election, was there's a huge number of Muslim Australian voters now who care deeply about the Middle East. Maybe they have family connections. He was concerned that I think Labor would be punished, particularly in some Western Sydney electorates, for having been seen to be not critical enough of Israel or not neutral enough. What's the advice, do you think, to him now, Paul, in the wake of this massacre? Does this change the perception of other Australians to give Albanese the cover he needs or the justification he needs to take actions that will probably be very unpopular in those communities?
This is a very difficult position Australia is now in, and that Mr Albanese, as Prime Minister, is now in. There's no getting away from that, because essentially what's got to happen is there's got to be a change of approach, and the government can't be guided anymore by these calculations of pure electoral balance. That's not going to work. That's not going to solve Australia's problem. This problem of anti-Semitism has got to be addressed. Now, that means it's got to be addressed in a whole series of ways. We do need a bipartisan approach coming from both Labor and the Coalition, if that's going to be possible. We do need a sense of reason. We've got to be careful of extremes coming from the right and the left, but we do need to consider things such as migrants coming to this country, the reliability of migrants, their commitment to Australian values, that's got to be addressed. Gun laws have got to be addressed. Government support for organisations that practice anti-Semitism has got to be identified and addressed. All these things have got to be on the table. Now, this is going to be very difficult politically. There's no question about that. But the government's got itself in this position. It tried to soft pedal these issues, and perhaps that worked in terms of the scale of its election victory last May. But that has bequeathed this incredible dilemma coming after the Bondi massacre, and there is no escaping this. The Prime Minister now has got to focus on the national interest and social cohesion. And I think that won't be an easy job given the electoral basis of the Labor Party.
The 1996 Port Arthur massacre gave John Howard an opportunity to be courageous in ways that his critics would never have anticipated he could. It also gave him a legacy that no one can doubt. Do you think that Anthony Albanese is capable of stepping up to this moment in a similar sort of way?
I think that the parallels with Port Arthur are very misleading. They are really misleading. I know that John Howard did stand up, and John Howard responded very effectively and won a lot of kudos from the strong position he took on gun laws, and that involved taking a series of political risks for Howard with his own constituency. This situation is very, very different. This situation goes to the heart of relationships in the Australian community. It goes to the heart of tensions in this country inherited from communities coming from the Middle East. It goes to the changing nature of Labor policy in relation to Israel and Palestine. These are now very, very difficult issues that have become far more difficult for Anthony Albanese. But the post of Prime Minister, the whole job of Prime Minister, is coming to grips with with crisis. It involves coming to grips with events like this. And in some ways, this will be the making or breaking of Anthony Albanese.
Paul Kelly is the Australian's editor-at-large. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.